Are you always on the move, chasing new adventures? Ever wondered if buying a house is even worth it for someone like you? On this episode of To Buy or Not to Buy, we're diving into the great rent versus buy debate for frequent flyers, wanderers, and anyone who loves to change their address. Get ready to discover if home ownership is a good fit for your adventurous lifestyle. Welcome to Dollars and Dreams, the podcast designed to empower you to take control of your personal and business finance. You know, the very thought of money and finance can often send chills down your spine and stir up fear of the unknown. But let's change that narrative together. Through this podcast, my goal is to not only to provide you with useful information, but also to inspire and motivate you to take action towards your own financial goals. Let's rewrite your money story together. Well, happy Thursday and welcome to Dollars and Dreams. In today's podcast, I'm going to go through something that we hear debated quite often where we work, and that is, should I buy or should I just rent and use my money for other investments? So today we're going to look at the pros and cons of each. We'll look at the true cost of home ownership, and we'll break down when buying a home may not be the right thing for you. So the reality is that if you have a lifestyle where you like to constantly move, where you're not sure if the city that you're currently living in is the city that you want to live in for the rest of your life, or whether you want to put your roots down and stay where you are some of the factors that you need to understand before you look at whether you should buy or rent. The first thing that I want to say here is if you're unsure about it from a financial point of view, jump onto our webpage, jenrichardson.co. If you go to our resources, and in there we have a heap of calculators. One of those calculators is rent versus buy. So you can put in there your circumstances that you have, and you'll find out whether you are better off to rent or better off to buy. And of course, one of the main factors of which way is better for you is how long you plan on staying where you're currently living. One of the things that we see is a lot of people aren't quite sure if home is where they're always going to want to have their home. If you're looking that you may want to travel overseas or live a few years in different cities, then potentially home ownership isn't for you right now. And keep in mind that any decisions you make now is for your current circumstances. It's not a forever type thing. With mortgage interest rates being, at about the right level at the moment, I mean, they've been very cheap over the last few years, that decision can be different to what that decision may have been when interest rates started with a 1, and definitely different to when interest rates started with a 9 or a 10. It is important to remember that when you buy a house, there is a lot of costs that you have that you lose if you then sell. Yes, homes go up in value mostly, but there are costs that you will incur in the purchase of a home that is what we call a sunk cost. You never get it back. So that's things like your legal fees, all the searches and things that you will do, the costs of setting up a mortgage, and of course, the government stamp duty that apply on a state-by-state basis, and that's very different depending on the state. When you sell a home, obviously you have costs as well. So you'll have potentially staging costs. There'll be commissions to the real estate agent that sells your home. Again, there's legal fees. And again, there's exit fees from your mortgage. So there are additional costs, and some of those can be fairly significant, particularly the stamp duty, because that's based on the value of your home when you purchase it. And of course, the real estate agent fees can be quite high when you sell a property. So if you're not quite sure if the city you're currently in is the place that you want to stay, you need to consider those costs when you're making your decision of whether you rent or buy. I guess the real downside of renting, not buying, is that you have no certainty. So the homeowner can decide to sell that home that you're renting at any point. You could have it that they want to move back into the home, or they will want to re-let it after your period of time is up, so that they can potentially increase the rental payments. The other thing is, when you reach retirement, if you're a non-homeowner, that can put a significant strain on your finances because you're trying to find rent out of your either superannuation pension or your aged pension off the government. So there are a few things to consider. You certainly get aged pension based differently depending on whether you're a homeowner or not. And so there is a challenge at that end. So when you look at whether you want to buy a home or invest into just renting, that's a decision that you need to take on more than just a financial level. The impact in retirement is probably the most significant impact that you'll have. And of course, the other thing to consider is when you're renting at the moment, the amount of properties on the market doesn't seem to match the people that are wanting to rent. Because of course, as our population grows, which it is continually growing, the market's not keeping up with that. And I know the governments are trying to look at ways to increase the rental property market, but that takes time, and unfortunately there can be a little bit of a lag. So if you've chosen to go down the rental path and the homeowner decides that they're either going to sell that home or they want to move into it or no longer rent it to you, you go back into that market of trying to track down a rental property that suits you and your pricing. Rental properties can be difficult in that some of them you can't have pets. And of course, in Australia here, as you know, we are the great pet ownership country. So if your landlord says that you can't have a pet, potentially you may have to rehome your family pet, or even though you may want to get one, you may not be able to. So there's, as I said, there's lots of other decisions that work on whether you should rent or buy that may not be all financial. The other thing to look at is the security that home ownership does give you. So, you know, it's the great Australian dream of home ownership. And it does give you that sense of purpose. It gives you some normalcy to your life, and it gives you that real grounding that particularly renting can't do, because you do risk, as I said, being evicted. And it depends if you're a creative person as well. So if you like to change things up if you like gardening and you want to put new gardens in, or you like to hang pictures, or you want to repaint because you don't want to live in a standard coloured house, these are all decisions that need to be made. So today's podcast is not just about the financial things that you need to consider when you're looking at whether to rent or invest, but also the psychological things that come with renting and home ownership. So in today's podcast, I want to challenge you as to whether buying a home is the right thing for you. Now, I still live in the same city that I was born in. So for me, home ownership was always important. I couldn't see me leaving where I live. And I made the decision when I was in my early 20s that I was going to buy a house, because when I left home, I didn't want to be paying off someone else's house. But that's very different to friends that I have that have really travelled the world. You know, they've worked in lots of different cities, and they'll do 2 or 3 years in London. They might have done 2 or 3 years in New York. Some of them have done a couple of years in Bangkok. So for those friends of mine, they're never going to buy a home because they don't see them staying in one place for very long. So for them, it's they rent for a couple of years, they pack up, they move, they come back, and they move again. So there is, as I said, that real thought process that you need to do. There's lots of hidden costs though with renting, because of course we talked about the hidden costs of home ownership, like the stamp duty, the advertising or the commissions when you leave. But as a renter, you've got hidden costs as well. So constantly moving, whether you move yourself or you get movers in to move you, if you're moving houses every 12 months, you've got that additional cost. You've also got the costs of doing mostly commercial cleans when you leave, because most people don't want you leaving the property in a state that it wasn't in before. You've also got the hidden costs of potentially fixing things up when you leave. So any damage to the property, you will need to fix and restore before you leave. The other thing that we see as a short-term hidden cost is the bond. So if you're moving to a new house, you need to put your bond up, and it may be that you've got to put that up before you get your old bond back. And so that can be a short-term cash flow problem for you. The other thing is we see as financial advisors here is not so much now, thankfully, because everything's linked through your MyGov, but we used to find that people would lose track of their superannuation and or their bank accounts when they moved, because if you forget to tell your superannuation fund when you move home, they get returned mail. They can count your superannuation as lost super. So it is important to keep track of all of those things if you're a constant mover. And again, when you are in retirement, if you have your own home and you need to go into aged care, there's lots of things that will take into account how much you pay in your aged care with your monthly premiums or your daily costs. And that is determined on whether you're a homeowner or a non-homeowner. And for the first couple of years that you're in aged care, you can potentially rent out your home without it affecting your aged care. So there's a couple of things to think of there. But one of the new things that's really on the market at the moment is what we call rentvesting. And it's a real hybrid approach to do I buy or do I rent? And so what happens with rentvesting is you get the best of both worlds, I guess. A lot of people potentially want home ownership for when they are retired and they don't want to have to find themselves out of a home when the landlords decide to sell it. And so they want that security in their older years, but they want that real nomad lifestyle in their younger years. Rentvesting allows you to do both of that. So what rentvesting is you buy a home, but then you don't live in it, you rent it out. So the tenants will help pay off the mortgage. You will still be able to live your nomadic lifestyle where you might live here renting for a few years, move overseas and rent, or move to another city and rent. And so what that does is then you have the best of both worlds. As I said, you've got a property that you're paying off and your tenants are helping you, and then you're paying rent, so it counteracts it. Of course, there could be some potential tax benefits with being negatively geared, and it does mean that you will be able to take advantage of the growth that happens inside of rental property, because over the years that is classed as a growth asset, and so it tends to increase in value over time. So the rent vesting lets you build an asset that you can live in when you are ready to retire, or of course you can sell it and buy a unit or something smaller, but it still gives you that home ownership without you being tied to one location. So that's an option for some people. The other thing that we find when we're working with people is if you have rented for a significant period of time, so you've left home, you go and rent somewhere. If you decide at some point that you have decided to buy a property because you're either going to rent vest or you're going to stop renting and start living in a property of your own, it's really very difficult to pay a mortgage and try to pay rent. So if you're trying to get a deposit ready for a mortgage, you need to be able to find the money to pay rent as well. So what we tend to say to people is, if your rent is less than the mortgage repayment, which potentially it might be at the moment, you should be starting to save on a long-term basis, ready for when you want to buy a house. And when we look at whether we're better off renting or buying, one of the key things we look at is, what do you do with that excess money that you have by not paying a mortgage? If you invest it into something that is going to grow over time, that will impact the cost of renting as opposed to the cost of buying. So it is important to remember that if you're going to rent, if at some point you think you may want to buy a home, you need to start to save towards having that deposit so that you can at some point down the track get a home that you might want to live in. The other thing to keep in mind is that first home buyer schemes and exemptions to stamp duty can be impacted if you rent vest, because most of those has to be your first home that you're buying. So if you've bought a home and rented it because you're rent vesting, then you will impact those stamp duty exemptions and first home buyer grants that you may be able to get if you're buying your first home. So this is a nice little short podcast today, and really what I want you to think about is what is best for you. I mean, we've all heard the older generation all say to us, you have to buy your home, you're wasting your money if you're renting. And that is just simply not the case for everyone. Everybody's circumstances are very different. And so, of course, what's good for you may not necessarily be good for the next person. And as I always say in all of my financial literacy courses, make decisions based on your individual circumstances, not somebody else's circumstances. So don't make this decision that I'm going to rent or I am going to buy without considering what is best for you and financially where you are better off to sit. Ignore the noise that's out there. So again, on our website, jenrichardson.co, jump into the resources tab and into the calculators, and you'll find a calculator in there which is rent versus buying. So make those decisions based on your own circumstances. Consider also the non-financial circumstances, such as the security that comes with having your own home, the need to either decorate or have a house set up with all the right colours that suit you, rather than the very plain colours that a rental property will tend to have. Look at what your retirement looks like. Are you going to be a grey nomad that never really puts down roots still? Or are you going to want to set up some roots so that family is part of the journey? We often find also people that have made a choice to not have children. Sometimes renting is better for them because they're not looking to give security for the kids for a schooling system. They're not looking to have places set where they can babysit grandchildren and things like that. So if you're going to be a couple that have made a choice to not have children, or an individual might have made a choice not to get married and have children, then that circumstance will be very different. You don't need to leave a legacy, so you definitely don't want to have a family home. You may just want to continually travel the world. And we've all heard stories, haven't we, of the people that are on cruises that just live on a cruise. They pull into ports, they get all their cooking done, and some of those people, that's a decision they've made that they will do. So I want to encourage you to always assess your own personal circumstances and financial goals, not to listen to the noise that's out there. And of course, if you need any help, reach out to us here at jenrichardson.co, and hopefully you'll jump onto our calculators. There's a heap of them there that can help you in your financial journey. So that is it for today. As I said, it's a nice little short podcast, but I thought it was important to have a podcast on this because I hear so many people pressured into making a decision one way or another without considering their own personal circumstances. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast, so wherever you're listening or watching it, and jump over to our website, jenrichardson.co, if you need to get any help with your own personal financial goals. So that's it for me. If you're looking for business finance, I'll see you next Tuesday. Otherwise, I'll see you next Thursday when we do personal financing. Have a great week, and thank you for joining me today. Remember, the advice shared in Dollars and Dreams is general in nature, and it does not consider your own personal circumstances. Dollars and Dreams is for educational purposes only and should not be relied upon to make investment or financial decisions. If you need more help, please reach out to a financial advisor for tailored personal advice. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content. And please leave me a review. Your feedback really helps me to reach other people chasing their money dreams. You can find me over on Facebook and Instagram to connect with me. You will find the link in the bio, or head over to my website at jenrichardson.co, where you will find free content and learning tools.